My all-time favorite record, my all-time favorite, I also pulled that up for everybody, is Nebraska is my favorite record.
Okay.
My number one. And my dream would be if I could time travel, or if Bruce decided he wanted to, Nebraska solo tour. And if I really had my, this is obviously ridiculous, but like to see it in a slightly smaller venue. Like we have a couple
Yeah.
really cool venues here in Vancouver. Like if he
Yeah.
was playing like the Orpheum or something, and I got to hear him do these songs and do it with that same, like, to have him tap into that older version of himself and to like
Yeah.
get into that grit, like just what you're hearing on the songs, I think would be
Yeah.
amazing. And then the other part of me wants to go see Bruce with the E Street Band, just blow me away the way he did when I saw him on the last show here in
Yeah.
2020.
Here is the second half of my discussion with Cail Judy. We talk about some of his favorite albums, songs, and of course the Mary question. So here you go. Getting back to Bruce, just because, are there songs or albums? And originally you mentioned that Bruce is, I think you said he's in my top three. So
Yeah.
I've got to ask, who's the other two? And then I'm just curious.
Yeah. So so Bruce is like is my all-time top three dudes. My other two are Nick Cave and Tom Waits. So those
Okay.
are my three guys. And all Nick Cave, I'd say the most honey voice. Tom
Yeah.
Waits the least. But I have a real affectation for singers who have gruff
Yeah, like that.
voices. There's a
Okay.
Canadian band. Have you ever heard of the Constantines?
No.
I think you would be a big fan of the Constantines. They have a
That's
record called Tournament of Hearts that's amazing. And Bry Webb, the lead singer, has a lot of Neil Young
okay.
in him. And the other band that, if we're going to keep it on Bruce, so those are my top three. So not a
Okay.
top band, and not a band that I listen to as much, but for about 8-10 years, this was like one of my all-time favorite bands too, was
Okay.
the Gaslight Anthem.
Sure.
New Jersey, if you familiar with those guys.
Yes, we are. Yeah, that's cool. That's neat.
Yeah.
So are there, you've kind of mentioned Darkness, but are there albums or songs that mean a lot to you?
Yeah, so I pulled out some records, Jesse, to show you. So
Okay.
I thought I'd give you a few. So Bruce record that I didn't think would become a favorite that has become one of my favorites is Tunnel of Love. Love this record. Listen to it all the time. It's probably one of the records, honestly now, it's probably one of the Bruce records I listen to the most.
So if you invited me on your show, I would probably want to, and you're like, okay, which Bruce album do you want to talk? I would probably say that, or maybe Wrecking Ball, just to get a album that maybe some of your audience hadn't listened to. But Tunnel of Love, someone once told me, and this may be not fair as you're a man planning to get married, but you can appreciate Tunnel of Love till your heart's been broken a couple of times. And I think there is some age to do that, right? Whether you're, because it is an album that talks a lot about, life and what's going on. I love Tunnel of Love.
How old was Bruce in 1987?
Well, let's think. He turned 71 this year, so he was born in 49. So that's 59, 69, 79, 89, 39, 40, right?
Yeah, so he would only have been a few years older than me when he recorded this album.
Yes.
So I was just thinking about that, but he was also married and he got divorced from his first wife. I think,
yes.
in the middle of recording this, and you can,
Yeah. The story, right, is that it is a story of a marriage breaking apart. It was released, and then they ended up getting divorced, like shortly after the release. And I'm sure I have listeners yelling at me that I've got the time wrong, but yes, I know that he and Patty started seeing each other, and originally there was a connection during the Tunnel of Love tour. So yeah, that's a great album.
I wonder if Brilliant Disguise or Two Faces like maybe refer to a bit of that feeling of him realizing that this is the wrong person, but that period where he was like,
Yeah.
maybe stepping out on his first wife, and that the guilt, like, I mean, it sucks. Like, that would have been a really like a not good situation to be in, or to feel.
Yeah.
Gotta say, like, there's some dynamite songwriting on here.
Well, he talked about, I don't know if you have read his autobiography, but he talked about it, that he was sitting there with Julianne Phillips, his first wife. They were sitting across the table from each other, and he is looking at this beautiful woman who seems to adore him and who wants him to be part of her life. And he's thinking, this is all a shell. You don't really know me. And if you know me, you would be gone. And then, have you watched the Western Stars film?
I have not seen the Western Stars film.
Okay, that's your homework. Go get that. Because he says in Western Stars that there was a point in his life that if you loved him, or I'm going to say this wrong, or he loved you, he went out of his way to hurt you before you could hurt him. And that so I think when you throw that in, him saying that, and when you throw in like the Tunnel of Love album, the discussion about from the autobiography, it sounds like he has gone through a lot of therapy, and he was very self-destructive, and he has been open about depression. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
Absolutely. It's tough. Like, it really, the question of the tortured artist, I think, is unfair, because most artists, you could argue, do create interesting work when they're in pain. But if you've experienced depression, like, nothing wants to make you be productive. Like depression does not make you productive.
No.
Pain and depression just zaps the color from your soul. Like, it's not something
absolutely.
It's not going to give you. But all that to say, that I would say that the complications and the things that he was navigating, and honestly trying to avoid, dealing with his problems, like, that's common. And as a side note, to specifically to the music, Valentine's Day, maybe one of the most interesting endings to a Bruce record maybe ever. Like, what a weird song to end. I love it, but it's like, what an interesting choice to end this record on. Like, give me another record that has a more interesting closer than Tunnel of Love. I would.
And I think that's a really good point. I agree. That's really nice. All right, so.
Oh, I got a couple more here. So
please do continue.
Bruce, my most random Bruce. I only have one. I mean, bootleg, but check this out. So,
yes.
So to Bruce, it's from. It's Bruce, the handsomest man in showbiz. He live at the Meadowlands in 1984.
Oh, nice.
And it's got a great version of Pink Cadillac on it. So side A is Cover Me, Atlantic City, Highway Patrolman, Pink Cadillac. And side B is Follow That Dream, I'm on Fire, I'm Going Down, Bobby G in my hometown.
Nice.
At Meadowlands, August 17th, 1984. And it's dedicated to Miami, little Steven Van Zandt. And it's cool. Like, I mean, it's whoever did the mastering, it's not amazing, but it is cool to hear that version of Pink Cadillac.
Oh, I bet.
I would be curious to know, I would say, on the bootleg front, have you listened to like a lot of the demos from like the Nebraska born, like the Colts Neck time?
So I have my share of sessions, and because I know my addictive personality, like, to share, my sister-in-law is a dietitian, and one holiday we were talking about, the different diets, right? And Robin said, look, if a diet tells you can't eat a banana, that's a bad diet, and they said, well, okay, Robin, what is the best diet? And the best diet is, eat a well-rounded we eat a well-rounded meal in moderation. That's the best diet. And my wife looked at her and goes, do any of us look like we deal with moderation? you know? And so I say that because bootlegs and video games are two addictions that I've stayed away from. Like, I know that if I started doing the bootleg, that it would
Oh yeah.
get me down a path that on. And same thing, like, I just don't play video games because I just know I would get sucked into, like, I can remember when we had arcades, I would go every lunch and just throw quarters into a Tetris game. I would just spend my whole lunch hour playing
Yeah.
Tetris. And so I'm like, okay, I do not need a computer game at my house or else I will never get anything done. So I haven't done that. I haven't gone to bootlegs that much.
Did you ever smoke cigarettes?
No. I've never was a smoker. I actually very little drinking. I was raised in a very Southern Baptist conservative home that if one beer and the next step you're in a ditch homeless, right? There was no room for my wife, who was raised Catholic, was like, we have wine as kids, and and things. So I did that. Also, such a conservative thing. I never experimented with drugs either. I am the only 61-year-old guy. I can honestly tell you, I've never tried pot. Because at this point, now my son is like, Dad, we got to get you some edibles, And the only just a funny, I think it's funny is 3 years ago I was diagnosed with colon cancer and was going through chemo, and it relatively speaking, I had it fairly easy. I didn't lose my hair. I just felt like crap all the time on chemo.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think to say out loud to Chris, hey, can any of your buddies get me some pot to see if that would help me? And it was like at the very end, my last round of chemo, one of Chris's best friends said, Papa Jay, all you had to do was ask. So I was like, there was my chance that I could try. So it's just something I haven't done. And I think partly is because of my addictive personality. So
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. If you don't feel like you could indulge in it in a healthy manner, then probably I've got a
yeah,
buddy like that
yeah,
who would just like, we would, like I never smoked a ton, but I like the odd cigarette here and there. And
yeah.
he was just like, he would like wake up and like think about smoking like on his walk to work, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's a different.
What is kind of funny, Cail, is the 2012, Bruce is not touring anywhere close to Texas. And my wife and I were discussing, we wanted to go on a vacation together. We had not gone without the kid and without another couple in years. And we're like, we want to just, you and I, let's get out of town. And so we ended up getting in the car and we drove from Texas to Kentucky, which is about, it's a day and a half, and we did half the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And so that's where all the bourbon distilleries are. And so we would drive, we would do the tour, we would get samples. I would smell the sample, put my tongue on it, and then give her my sample behind everyone's back. She would drink the bourbon samples. And then we did that. We did half the Bourbon Trail. We drove up to Cleveland, Ohio, saw Bruce in Cleveland, then did the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, came back, did the second half of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, then came back home, and we called it our Bourbon and Bruce tour. And I have been said that sounds like the perfect vacation. And it was really great because the area in Kentucky where most of the bourbon distilleries are is absolutely beautiful. I mean, picture horse farms and just pastures and just this beautiful trees and everything. And the distilleries are, many of them have been around since the Civil War. And
Mhm.
so there's the building. So that was amazing. But the idea was, you're like, you must really love bourbon. No, my wife likes bourbon. I love going and touring and smelling it, but I'm not a big bourbon drinker. So yeah.
Is she a Bruce fan as well?
No, she she went to see him in 2002. My first show was in 2002, and I've often said, um, Cail, that there's two people: the people that go to their first Bruce show and go, "Wow, that's long," and the second one is, "Oh my gosh, I want to see this man every time I can because this is amazing." Um, she was the first. She's like, "He didn't play any song I know." It was a Rising tour. She had not, she didn't know anything. Um, so when we went to Cleveland, um, I I did extra walking so that I would be more comfortable doing the tours because I knew there'd be a lot of walking. So I trained by extra walking so I would be better at, be less winded and be able more in shape. And she listened to Wrecking Ball CD, so she knew every song on the Wrecking Ball. And then I gave her a couple other selections, so she knew probably about half the songs. And she now likes Bruce live. Like she's like, I don't want to go to 15 shows a tour, but if there's if there's a show on a tour, I'd like to go and see that one tour, and then that's enough. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
How about your fiance?
she appreciates that I like it. She has her strong interests as well. She
Yeah,
likes that I'm into it a ton. She is not. She likes Bruce a lot.
yeah,
Like our third date, we watched the "I'm on Fire" video and um, had a great talk about that. Like she likes Bruce a lot.
hmm
There's a great cover she showed me of the Chromatics do a really great cover of "I'm on Fire" as well.
okay,
But yeah, no, she likes Bruce. I would say she's like a fan as much as yeah, like she likes him, but I wouldn't say
yeah,
she yeah, we're on, there's different levels of
yeah,
appreciation. But she
exactly.
likes Bruce.
Yeah. Okay, we get past the pandemic. Gail, he's touring again.
Mm-hmm.
He's heading to Vancouver, or you get some extra money and you're flying to Jersey to see him perform.
Oh man, nope.
Or maybe, you're like, I got to go see my buddy down in Texas. Jesse can buy me barbecue and or margaritas, we can do Tex-Mex. Are there songs that you want to see live that you haven't had a chance to hear?
I saw, I was thinking about that question because so my all-time favorite, I also pulled that up for everybody, is Nebraska is my favorite record.
Okay.
My number one. And my dream would be, I know you're not into bootlegs, but I bought it off the website,
Mhm.
but there weren't a ton of bootlegs. And I don't know if it's officially bootleg if you buy it off the Bruce Springsteen website
Yeah.
now, but there's a show he did in Belfast on the Shut the Bleep Up tour. If
Yeah.
you're familiar with that phase when he was touring Ghost of Tom Joad, and he did a bunch of really cool strip back versions, did a bunch of Nebraska stuff and Tom Joad stuff. I would love to, if I could time travel, or if Bruce decided he wanted to. I'm of two minds. One of me, like the two times I've seen him, the second time I saw Bruce was was transcendent. It was let me finish my first thought. So I would love to see Bruce do either a Nebraska solo tour, and if I really had my this is obviously ridiculous, but like to see it in a slightly smaller venue. Like we have a couple
Yeah.
really cool venues here in Vancouver. Like if he
Yeah.
was playing like the Orpheum or something, and I got to hear him do these songs and do it with that same, like, to have him tap into that older version of himself and to like
Yeah.
get into that grit, like just what you're hearing on the songs, I think would be
Yeah.
amazing. And then the other part of me wants to go see Bruce with the E Street Band, just blow me away the way he did when I saw him on the last show here in
Yeah.
2012. And the cool thing about that show was that
Yeah.
Bruce, it was not too long after Clarence passed away,
Okay.
and I got floor tickets for that show, and I went with my buddy Jordan, and we got on the floor, and we couldn't get to the very front. That was like you had to have there was a lottery to get like right
Sure.
up to the front, but there was this partition that blocked those two off, and a little stage that you could walk across. And so we got our way up to that, and it was an amazing show. Like Bruce played Racing in the Street, which was one I'd wanted to hear live for a long time. So that's what I would have said I would have wanted to hear. And then at a certain point, probably like from me to the second bookcase there,
Yeah.
one point right near the end of the show, Bruce came out, and it was during 10th Avenue Freeze Out. And when the line, and I think he did it on a lot of the shows, but the line came up and the big man joined the band and he hit this pose. I was probably like 8 feet from him.
Wow.
And I saw him, like I could see his like muscle shaking, and he stared at that screen when they played that Clarence montage the whole time. And it was like he didn't break that for like he was so in that moment, and to be that close to him and just to have like this amazing show. Like he was like gospel preacher Bruce, he was rock and roll Bruce, he was like he had like all the like, and his like energy was just insane. It was a great show. And then to be to be that close to him at the end and to see him so up close and have like the emotion was just like radiating off him, and like it was crazy. Like I was just like if you like the best way to see a show if you can is to like, I think if you can get on the floor and be close, like I don't know, just to see him, like he was so like he is an idea, but he's also a man. But in that moment, he was kind of both in a way. That I think is one of the really amazing things about seeing a live Bruce show, is that you're kind of seeing the myth and the man all at once, you know?
So I mentioned before we started that, one of my other podcasts is I do a Doctor Who podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And I've often joked that, on Doctor Who fandom, they go, where would you take the TARDIS? Where would you take the TARDIS? And I'd say, I'd take it to every Bruce show that's ever happened to go. For that thing, right? To go hear him at that small venue, to see, I would love to go in 75, 76 when he's in Houston, Texas, in these small shows that they talk about, just for fun. Part of my 5-year celebration is my buddy Charles, who co-hosts the Doctor Who podcast with me, joined me, and we picked 5 concerts that we would go to using the TARDIS. And we both kind of gave us like he said, are you just going to pick 5 Bruce shows? And I go, no. I said, I'm going to, the rules are you can only pick one show by one artist. All right. So you got to pick 5 different artists and 5 different shows. And we did that. And that was a fun discussion about, he picked some, police show that because he's seen Sting, but he never saw Police in their heyday. And I picked that, how cool would it be to be at the Cavern Club and see the Beatles before they went live? Like, I would love to go see that. And so that was a fun episode. We talked back and forth. So that's good. This has been a blast. I appreciate it, and I've kept you way too long, but what have I not asked you that I should have?
I think you asked me a lot of great questions. I really appreciated the intentionality with which you're kind of approaching the conversation and trying to really like get to know someone's background. Because I think it's unique in that I think part of the reason like Bruce means a lot to a lot of people, and for maybe a variety of reasons, but there is something really something just, if you want to, there's a lot you can really grab onto with him, and a lot to chew on. I can't really think of a question that you didn't ask me. I mean, I would say like just thinking about just looking at Nebraska again.
No, I was going to say you may check out a guy named Mark Hader, who is in Ohio. Did just a recent album of 10 Springsteen covers in the style of Nebraska.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
And I got one for you then. So Mark, what's his name? Mark Hader?
Yeah. And he actually joined me on the show, and he talked about the album, and then it's I could send you the link.
Yeah, maybe email me the link. That would be That'd be cool. The other
Yeah.
one I meant to pull up
And it's
was
Kevin Hayter, not, I knew I misheard. It's Kevin Hayter. So yeah. And he also does a podcast, Song and Story, which is similar. He has musicians join him and they give the story behind the song. And the album is called Ohio. And it's Kevin Hyder, Heider. Ohio, a tribute to Springsteen.
H-E-I?
I-D-E-R. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah. The other one I would say to that sense would be, there's also a really great cover album that just got released a couple of months ago from a group in Toronto, and it's a compilation of different covers of Nebraska, and it's called at the end of every hard-earned day, some people find some reason to believe, a tribute to Nebraska, and that's on Bandcamp. So if you look that up,
okay,
it's kind of a sepia tone version of that cover.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that.
Okay.
I know Nebraska is one that's up there for a lot of people in terms of like kind of faves, but like I also like, I would actually say the one I've enjoyed getting into the most probably the last couple of years has been The River. But I mean, what's the one thing I would be interested if when we do I think we should do, we will definitely do a podcast together. And I think it would be interesting because the one thing I struggle a bit with Bruce is because he's had so much music, is I kind of think of it like the older Bruce to younger Bruce phase, because like there was like all the records up to I'd say Tunnel of Love. And then when the 90s hit and Ghost of Tom Joad, Streets of Philadelphia, obviously Human Touch, Lucky Town, all those. And then it was like, and then that kind of that period where he was just kind of gone. And then The Rising came out, and then he kind of did Magic and all the stuff since. And I think Wrecking Ball to me is like up until Western Stars was like, I thought that was my favorite of his. Like there were definitely like Girls in Their Summer Clothes is an amazing song. Like
it is. Yeah, absolutely.
But like I would say like Bruce, older Bruce it would be interesting to compare, because like I just don't think you could battle, like you can't battle The River and Working on a Dream. Like they're just to me they're just so different. They're just different, almost different art, not different artists, but like they're different. I guess you could, but like it would be the idea of like comparing. I think it would be to me it'd be more interesting to compare like Western Stars and Magic or something where it's like you're kind of coming from a similar.
And one of the things I thought about, is Peter Chianca, who does Blogness on the Edge of Town. That's a very popular Springsteen blog, and he and I have talked about doing this, and it might be something. I can't remember the comedian. But it was some impressionist that says there's actually, when he does Sinatra, there are like 5 phases of Sinatra. Like when you're doing a Sinatra, there's young Sinatra, there's the movie star Sinatra, there's the elder statesman Sinatra, and each voice is different. And I've often thought it would be an interesting discussion to what are the ages, what are the eras of Springsteen? Like you could also the undiscovered Springsteen, for the first, everything before up to the first 2 albums. And then do you group Born to Run, Darkness, Nebraska and River, Born in the USA, all in the, the like before Born in the USA, the rock and roll icon, and how would you divide the eras and how would you do them, and and I think from Broadway forward you would get, this is the like the elder statesman Bruce, but then he went and gave Western Stars, and now he's doing Letter to You, and you're like, okay, so is there a brand new era? So I think that would be an interesting discussion to have.
I think that'd be a fascinating discussion, and he's honestly one of the few artists. I mean, the Stones, it's impressive. I mean, it's crazy that they're still pumping out shows. But like with Bruce, you're like, he's just got so much vitality. You're like, you could do. Part of it for me too is like even listening to Letter to You when it came out, the single.
Yeah,
I really liked it, but I think one of the things I really connect with in like older Bruce is like some of the stories or the lyrics. And I guess the final question, if we have time still, was the Mary question. But
Yes.
the
Oh yeah,
fact
we got to have the Mary question.
so he poses all these questions and these scenes and these characters, like even thinking about how early Gaslight, when they were they were listening to tons of Sam Cooke and Otis Redding and obviously Bruce and the Stones and the Replacements. But even Brian would write a lot about some of their best songs. He mentions Maria and Mary. It's interesting why that would come up. But I think for me, it's like when Bruce writes the newer ones, he's writing these songs more to himself or to like an older version of himself. And I get that it's like the guy's not trying to write another, hit song that we would have heard on an earlier record like that. Like these are the songs that are connecting with him now. But that said, I think he's still, and he made a comment in I think it was with maybe Rolling Stone, but he said that I can still tap into all those older versions of myself. Like I think he has it in him if he wants to write another Tunnel of Love or to write another River if he chose to.
Right.
It's crazy. Like I can't think of any other artist that's had his legacy and career that's like, I could pull that leather jacket out of the closet and put it on and write a version of that. But he's Bruce. He doesn't have to. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
So
very, very good points. All right. So yes, for those of you who may have never heard the podcast, time for the Mary question. So Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. Every year, his seniors, they take 2 days and they break Thunder Road apart as a poem. They go through the lyrics, they look at the imagery, the lyrics that Bruce has chosen, they compare it to Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And at the end of the 2 days, Jay looks at his class and he says, "Does Mary get in the car?" So, Cail, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Okay, I'm just refresh myself on the lyrics. I did tell you earlier, Jesse, this is my cover song. I won't subject you to any actual singing of it, but I think thinking of the final line, so Mary climb in, it's a town full of losers, and I'm pulling out of here to win. I think you could say that she doesn't. It's funny because I never had really thought about this, but she doesn't actually get in. She doesn't get into the car at any point in the song because the narrator is essentially like talking to her while she's on the porch this whole time, and he's in front of her house. And Bruce said this interestingly on the VH1 Storytellers, is that this song Thunder Road is also an invitation to the listener. It's an invitation to you to like seek something outside of yourself, to seek some adventure. And I think the question is a very interesting one because I think it's the classic glass half empty, glass half full. Are you a pessimist or an optimist, etc.? For me, Mary gets in the car because the promise in that invitation is that there is something, heaven's waiting down on the track, and like there's something out there. And if you're Mary, you're listening to Roy Orbison, you're feeling sad, but you're dancing and you're outside, and it's like you're waiting for that invitation. I think we're Mary, and so I think for me, I get in the car for sure, and I think Mary does too.
Good. I like that answer. That's good. So I told you before we hit record, about 60% of the people say yes, about 40% say no, just roughly. Some of my favorite stories, someone says absolutely she gets in the car because how else will Mary get married, get pregnant in the river, right? One of the best ones is he said absolutely because in Racing in the Street, she talks about she's on her daddy's porch. That's the same porch that's on Thunder Road, except now this time she's sad because this hasn't worked out for them. And I think one of my absolute favorite is I had a listener said, absolutely, she gets in the car, they drive all the way to California, they spend a life together, Mary dies, and in Moonlight Motel, he is mourning Mary. And when he goes to the Moonlight Motel, when he pours the Jack on the ground, that's Mary he's mourning. I'm like, okay, I love that. So, and then one last story. I had a guy say that it depends. I'm like, okay, it depends what? He says, well, if Thunder Road is being played by the full band, she absolutely gets in the car because it's such a joyous ending. You know, the band is playing off. You have the saxophone. It is a song of triumph. But when Bruce sings it solo, it's kind of a more downbeat ending, and him humming the end. She doesn't get in the car. I'm like, I love it. So, anyway, I appreciate your answer. I love your answer. I think that is a great answer, and thank you so much. This has been a blast. I do feel bad I've taken you so long, but I hope you had fun.
I had a great time. I really appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to John about the boss. It's great. I had pulled up a little thought.
Okay.
And I think this is like on Bruce's. Let's see. I think this is a sentence that this idea of, actually, no, you can maybe just cut that part out. I had this quote about a writer that I liked, and it was just the quote is this guy, Nick Tosches.
Okay.
Toshesh's best sentences uncoil like rattlesnakes and strike with a venom that spreads poison through all the little Sunday school ideas you've held dear. And that line made me think about how one of the things I love about Bruce so much is that his darker songs can be like that snake that can spread poison into like this idea you have of love, or this idea you have of this dream for yourself. But then his best songs are also the antidote. And I wonder if that's part of his appeal, is that he can write those dark songs, but he can also write those songs that are so captivating and just draw you in. And it's like you're getting both. It's like you're kind of getting, like maybe even on Western Stars, maybe that's why he's so drawn to the Western cowboy motif, is the idea of like striking out and, you know, encountering the darkness and the light.
Yeah. By the way, that would be a perfect introduction. I may pull that as my little blurb that I start of the episode, because that was absolutely beautiful. I feel like Western Stars could be a collection, I've said this many times on the podcast, of Elmore Leonard short stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's the guy who did Justify was based on. Also, maybe, you know, Zane Grey novels, right? Louis L'Amour. I mean, you know, this is Nebraska certainly felt like a collection of short stories, but Western Stars really does feel like that this is just a collection of stories he wants to tell. I found a website that was 3 or 4 years ago. It was a parody, but it made me wish it said that was a review of Springsteen's latest collection of short stories. And the story was a premise that he is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, that it talked about, you know, all the different albums, but instead of albums, they're books, and this latest collection. And it was like, yes, it would. That would be very, very cool. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
If you want to reach me, I'd say the best way would be to hit me up on Twitter, Cail_Judy. And I also have a link to Album versus Album on there. I also write as well. I do poetry and short fiction. And so there's a link to a bit of my work there. Yeah, I would say that would be that'd be where to find me. I'd definitely say if you enjoyed this, would love to have you come by and check out Album versus Album as well.
Yes, I urge you to go check that out. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you had as much fun as I do, and I would love to have you come back again. We'll figure another excuse to talk sometime next year. Got a new album to discuss. It's going to come up, and we'll see. So for now, thank you, Cail, for your time. Listeners, thank you for listening so much. It means the world to me. Please remember to be kind to each other. Remember to social distance. wash your hands, and as the boss says, wear an effing mask. Let's be good to each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.
This was great.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. That was a lot of fun. I really like the idea of maybe us doing. I think I like that idea because I think it would be an interesting episode. Maybe not just doing Letter to You, because Lucas and I don't record it super often. He's got 2 young kids, so it's a little harder for us to book time. What I think we should do though in the next few months is figure out a time to get together and do an Elder Statesman Bruce. So pick 2 Elder Statesman records, because then I'd love to open in the episode talking about that concept. Because for me, I'm saving Nebraska for our 50th or something. I want to punt that one down the line because it's a special one. But I'd be really curious because I think for me, I'm a lot less precious about the Elder Statesman stuff because it's new and it's he's trying stuff and some of it doesn't work, some of it is good, and some of it is it's such an interesting journey to see him go on through that, and so I think that'd be really interesting.
I think so. And I was gonna, if you ever need a guest, it's funny. I don't know if the guys' Great Album podcast. They've now kind of retired, but the premise is, they would pick an album and do the Great Album podcast. They would talk about the album. They were on my show. We had a really good time. They said, "Hey, Jesse, do you want to join us?" I said, "Yeah." I said, and just to kind of shake things up, I said, I don't want to pick a Bruce album to discuss. And we ended up talking Paul Simon's Graceland, which was fun because they said no, they had not discussed that and they thought it was an album they needed discussing. Then another guy did, same thing, an album review podcast. And I picked, for a change of pace, Linda Ronstadt, Haul Like the Rainstorm, Cry Like the Wind, which was where she did a lot of stuff with Aaron Neville, is just a favorite album of mine. So I had on there, and that was fun because he did not like the album at all. We're reviewing this, and he's like, he says, I appreciate you love it, Jesse, but there's hardly any song on this I like. So it was a really fun discussion. My other, I guess, my 3 would be obviously Bruce. I'm a huge Brian Wilson and Beach Boy fan. That was my first musical passion, is just that. And then if I had to pick a third, because I love a lot of people. I'm a big, Bobby Darin and Harry Chapin, but by far John Hyatt is. John Hyatt is a guy that is mostly known for writing. Are You Ready for This Thing Called Love from Bonnie Raitt, he wrote, and he's been along, and he is someone that if you ever wanted like me to talk, I would love to talk Bruce, but if you ever go like, hey, let's have Jesse and talk about something else, I'd love to join you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it'd be kind of fun to. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to do someone not Bruce. Although part of yeah, we could do either. Because I mean, I know because you're
Yeah.
talking about Bruce all the time, so it would be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know John Hyatt. That's interesting. I just
Well,
pulled up.
the reason you mentioned you like gravelly voices, so you may check out a couple of things. He's got his most famous song is "Have a Little Faith in Me," and that's been used in tons of movies. Bring the Family is an album that I really like a lot. There is a song, Just Like Your Dad Did, which I think is amazing. He did Perfectly Good Guitar, which is talking about making fun of people that destroy guitars. Do a search and play around, and then let me know what you think of John. And it might be fun for you to have you on and just kind of, if you go down a rabbit hole of Hyatt and talk about that. I don't know if you saw, but I had a guy named Matt McGee who was on, who he used to adore U2, and then they kind of broke up. Like for some reason, and he explains why, but just he was going through a lot, and just the music, he turned cold on them. And then he found Gang of Youth, an Australian band.
Oh.
And so he was similar to you, just very articulate, a lot of fun to talk to. So he and I talked forever. And I said, hey, Matt, you know what'd be fun? I said, why don't you give me 10 Gang of Youth songs to listen to? And then I'll listen to them over, the next month or so. And then I'll have you back on the podcast and I'll tell you what I think of those. Because early in the podcast, Cail, I did Springsteen newbie episodes where I picked someone who wasn't a Springsteen fan, but like they did another podcast, and I gave them 10 Springsteen songs of, like Highway Patrolman and Promised Land and Better Days and Jack of All Trades. I picked non-hits, and then we had a whole discussion. The whole episode was them telling me what they thought of those 10 songs.
I like that. That's a really good idea.
Yeah. So good.